Hello class, welcome to chapter 11, Measuring the Cost of Living.
The Consumer Price Index of CPI. CPI measures of overall cost of goods and services bought by typical consumers. Back to the multiple choice questions we learned before, right? So what's GDP? The GDP is the whole stuff produced within that year value. But the consumers, the cost is the overall cost of typical consumer. So that's two different definitions. Again, do not get confused. GDP is the income, and the CPI is the cost. If we talk about cost, usually we know there is a consumer there, right? Consumer pay the money for something. That's the monetary changes in the cost of living over time. And the core CPI, a major measure of the overall cost of consumer goods and services, excluding for the core CPI, we exclude food and energy. Why we should do that? The reason is because the price for food and energies will change frequently, right? Volatile. So if it changes frequently, changes so fast, it's really hard to calculate them because it changes from time to time, maybe from day to day. So usually for core CPI, we do not include the prices for food and energy. But CPI includes everything typical consumer consume. Producer Price Index, which is PPI, a measure of the cost of a basket of goods and services bought by firms. So that's how you distinguish a consumer and a producer, right? Consumer is a product consumed by consumer. A PPI starts with P. That's the product of goods and services bought by the firm. How the CPI is calculated? First, fix the basket. Remember, the definition for CPI is a measure of the overall cost of goods and services. What's overall stand for? It should be a basket of something, right? So how to fix and who should measure and should decide what's in the basket for a typical consumer? Is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or stands for BLS. Bureau of Labor Statistics surveys consumers to determine what's in the typical consumer's shopping basket. Again, that's the shopping basket what we measure. What's stuff in that basket? That stuff should be the stuff we need to calculate for CPI. And the second line is the website for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. If you want to find some data for economics, you can search on that website. And lots of data there for price, quantities, so on and so forth. Find the prices. The BLS collects the data on the prices of all the goods in the basket. Again, the price will change, but all the job will be Bureau of Labor Statistics. They are going to do all the jobs. All you need to do just go to that website and find the data. And still, BLS is going to calculate or compute the basket cost. Use the prices to compute the total cost of the basket. And these two expressions, again, are very important. So choose the base year and compute the CPI. How to compute the CPI? Two expressions for CPI. First is CPI. Denominator basket cost in current year is kind of like the GDP deflator, right? The numerator should be nominal, the current price. And the denominator is the cost in the base year, so it's kind of like the real GDP. The price in the base year. But the inflation rate is kind of the same. The CPI here. For the CPI chapter, so we use CPI this year instead of GDP deflator. So CPI this year minus CPI last year divided by the CPI last year. Again, do not forget to times 100. So here, you can see two inflations, right? The inflation you calculate with the GDP deflator. But the inflation in this chapter, CPI, you use CPI to calculate the inflation rate. Will these two inflation rates be the same? If there are differences, then why there will be difference? So think about that, and we are going to jump into that later, right? But I already read these four formulas over here, so we can compare it later. How to calculate CPI? Again, we have some assumptions, and the assumption is we assume that there are only two products in a typical consumer's basket. So for a typical consumer, they are only going to buy 10 pizzas and 5 shirts. Price is here. So use the formula here to calculate the CPI. First of all, that's easy. To calculate the price, the cost, right? Use the price in 2017 times the quantity, the basket, 10 pieces, $12 times 10 pieces, and the $18 for shirt times 5 shirts. So the total price will be the cost for a typical consumer in that year, in 2017. And the same for the consumer in 2018 and 2019. Use the price in that year times the quantity. And since the basket are the same, right? That's decided by the BLS. So they are going to decide what products are the typical products in the shopping basket. So when you calculate this 3 years cost, the basket product will not change. The pizzas will always be 10, and the shirt will always be 5. Only the price changes. How to compute the CPI in each year? Again, use this formula. The CPI equals to the basket's cost in current year divided by the basket's cost in base year. So if the base year is 2017, so all denominator should be the price or the cost in 2017, which is 210. The denominator are always the cost in 2017, and the numerator will be the basket price in current year. That's the 17, 18, and 19. Do not forget to times this 100, multiple 100, so that's the result. Still, you need to get familiar with this calculation and do not get confused. The base year and what price you need to times, what's in the denominator, what's in the numerator, and so on and so forth, because you are going to see this in your test. The inflation rate, use the CPI in the second year minus the CPI the year before or previous year divided by the CPI in previous year. So the first one is 14.3. Inflation for the second one for 2019, the same. And again, the denominator is the CPI of last year, all right? It's not the CPI in the base year or something. So it should be the last year. Do not get confused. Okay. So this is the typical basket of goods and services. You can see for typical consumers, they are going to spend 42.2% for housing. And that's easier to understand. That's the most expensive product we are going to buy in our life, usually, right? So that will count a huge amount of portion here. The transportation, that's the second huge count, like 16.7%. You need to get familiar, but you do not need to remember this. Just what counts in a typical basket of goods and services in this picture. All right. So next one, let's do this together. I'm going to use this part picture. So again, if you have the formula, all you need to do is just get familiar with put one number in that formula. And the result, that's easy. If you have the CPI in the 2019, and you also need, if you need to calculate the inflation rate from 2018 to 2019, you should have the CPI for these 2 years, which means the CPI for 2017 doesn't matter. Because we will calculate inflation, usually just this year and the last year. Only 2 years in a row, right? So you need to use the CPI in 2019 and the CPI in 2018. So the result is 50%. In this question, so that's the base year in 2017. So from the table, you can see that the price from 2017 to 2018, the prices increases proportionally, right? But in 2019, that isn't. For the price of beef increase is doubled from $4 to $8. But the price for chicken only increased by $1. So usually in that case, consumers' behavior will change because the relatively price are changed, right? So here, the new CPI basket for 2019, again, as I said, because the price from 2018 to 2019 changed a lot. For the beef, double the price. So in that way, consumers are going to buy fewer beef than before. Last question, the consumer bought 10 pounds of beef and 20 pounds of chicken. But since the price for beef will increase by a huge amount, in 2019, consumers are only going to consume 5 pounds of beef and more pounds of chickens, which is 25 pounds. So the calculation is the same, just plug in different quantities here. In this question, it's 5 pounds of beef and 25 pounds of chicken. So the quantity will be the same, plug in different prices. For the first two, the CPI will not change because for the prices in 2017 and 2018, for both beef and chicken, the prices are the same. And total amount of meat, still 30 pounds. So the result for the first two will not change. What will change is the CPI in 2019, and again, find out the inflation rate, use the CPI in the second year or in the current year, minus the CPI in the last year, right? And don't forget to times this 100 to get the percentage change. The problems with the CPI. First is the substitution bias. So over time, some prices rise faster than the others, like the example here. From 2017 to 2018, the price increased by the same amount. But from 2018 to 2019, the price for beef increased by a huge amount. That's what this sentence means. Some prices rise faster than the others. So consumers substitute toward goods become relatively cheaper. For example, like this one. When the price for beefs in 2019 gets much expensive, then consumers are going to consume fewer beef and more chicken. So that's substitute effect, right? And CPI misses the substitution because it uses a fixed basket. Again, in this example, if the BLS changed the basket for 2019, then you will not overstate or understate the CPI. But what if the BLS doesn't change the shopping basket, still use the basket in this one in 2017, then the result will be totally different, right? If the basket keeps in 2017, the inflation rate will be 50%. But with the new basket, the inflation is 37.5. So with the different baskets, the result of CPI would be different. And in this way, for the substitution bias, the result is the CPI overstates increase the cost of living. So for this part, we already know the result from the previous examples, right? So I'm going to summarize it in this part. So beef versus chicken. If the price was $4 versus $4, then consumers are going to consume 10 pounds of beef and 20 pounds of chickens. But when the price increased from 4 to 8 versus 5, only 5 pounds. If the consumer's behavior doesn't change, still 10 pounds of beef and 20 pounds of chickens, the result would be $80 if the consumers do not change their behaviors based on the newer price. But since there are some substitution effect, the consumers are going to buy more chicken and fewer beefs, then the new consumers' new behavior would be the 5 pounds of beef and 25 pounds of chicken. So the total price for the new behavior would be 165. So you can see with the new behavior or with the substitution effect, the new total cost will be lower than the previous one, which means if we omit the substitution effect, the CPI result will overstate, will be higher, right? So that's the substitution bias. The next part is kind of the same, introduction of new good. The introduction of new good increases the variety allows consumers to find the products that more closely meet their needs. In effect, dollars become more valuable. The CPI misses the effect because it uses a fixed basket of goods and services. Again, for this part, if we introduce a new good, it's kind of the same as with the price change, the substitution effect, right? So if we introduce a new good, usually it overstates the increased cost of living. Still use this as an example. Before, when the prices for beef and chickens were $4 versus $4, so 10 pounds and 20 pounds. If the consumer's behavior don't change, when the prices change by a huge amount, the cost would be $180. What if we introduce a new product like pork versus chicken? For the price of pork, that was $5. So 5 versus $5 chicken. The pork is a new introduction here. So again, it's kind of like the substitution effect. Consumers are going to buy pork instead of beef because they are kind of the same, not exactly, but they can substitute with each other. In that way, maybe consumers' behavior will change to like 10 pounds of pork and 20 pounds of chickens, but 0 pounds of beef. Consumers are going to buy pork instead of beef because the price for beef is too expensive. So in this case, after we introduce a new product, the final price would be 150. So again, 150 is smaller than 180. The CPI will overstate increase in the cost of living if we introduce a new product. In this example, it's the pork. If the price for pork is cheaper, then the total cost will be cheaper, smaller. The last one is the unmeasured quality change. Improvements in the quality of goods in the basket increase the value of each dollar. So if there is an improvement of quality, that will increase the value of each dollar. Because with one specific which each dollar you can buy a higher quality stuff, you can buy more value stuff. The BLS tries to account for quality changes, but probably misses some as quality is hard to measure. Thus, in this case, if the quality improved, then the CPI overstates increase the cost of living. So imagine an example like iPhone 7, such as in 2019, iPhone 7 was $799, and 8 was $899. 2019, I don't know the exact year, just an example. But in 2020, because the new iPhone 10 produced and the dollar was $949, the price for iPhone 8 will decrease from $899 to $849 in 2020. So which means if the quality improved for iPhone 10 here, which means for iPhone 8, the quality will not change, but the price decreases because there is a higher quality product there, right? That means the quality improvement. So in that case, with the smaller amount of money, I can buy the same quality product, or with the same quality, I can use a smaller amount of money to buy that, which means that increase the value of each dollar. With each dollar here, I can buy a higher quality stuff. So that's the example for this one. When the quality improve, that will overstate the increases of living. But for the first two, that will increase. For this one, it's not always true. If the quality of a good deteriorates, which means the quality will not improve but deteriorates, then it's understate. It's opposite from this one. So only when the quality improves that will overstate. But if the quality doesn't or deteriorate, then the CPI will understate. There are two ways to calculate inflation. So from the picture from the table, we can see that the blue line is the inflation we calculated from by CPI, and the red line is the CPI we calculate by GDP deflator. You can see that the inflation rate are different if we use different indicators to calculate. Why they are different? Where does the difference come from? So here, GDP deflator versus CPI. Remember, for GDP, that's calculate or that's measured income. For CPI, that's measured cost. So the definition for GDP is the value of all products produced within that year within that country. But for the definition of CPI, that's the cost of a typical consumer's basket. So the difference, the definition's difference will determine why the inflation will difference between these two. So first, imported consumer good. That include in CPI, but exclude from GDP deflator. Back to the definition. For CPI, that's the consumer's basket, right? As a consumer, I just want to buy some stuff. I do not care where that stuff comes from. I don't care if it's import, export, or domestic, or whatever. So I just buy that stuff, or that service, that good is a product in my basket. So that counts in my CPI. But the definition for GDP should the product produced within the country. So all the products are produced outside the goods or services you imported are not included in the GDP deflator. So that's the difference between these two. The first one is the imported consumer goods. The second one is the capital goods. Capital goods excluded from CPI, but included in GDP deflator if produced domestically. Again, back to the definition. For consumers, I just buy some stuff. Remember that picture? The house, the transportation, the food, the services, the medical. I buy this stuff just for my standard of living. I just enjoy it, but not some stuff I buy to produce like a tractor or something, like a machine, right? A typical consumer will not buy machine for their life or whatever, but the machine will count as GDP, as investment here, right? So for capital goods, will count as GDP, but not in CPI. That's the second difference. So the basket, CPI, fixed the basket, the price of all goods and services bought by consumers. So again, that's the cost, the CPI, the measurement of cost. So cost we consider consumer here. And for GDP deflator, that's the income that's produced within the country or within that year. So that's the prices of all goods and services currently produced domestically. These two parts determine why the inflation between these two are different. And compared to the GDP deflator, the CPI is more common gauge of inflation. So we use CPI to calculate inflation, to calculate the inflation rate model. Okay, then what's A? What's the answer for A? Remember the difference between CPI and GDP, what counts in different part. So figure out what's the answer for A. Because that's the food, right? That's in consumer's basket and also produced domestically. So it should be both. How about the second one? Because for typical consumers, they are not going to buy a tractor for what? For car, no. Right? So yeah, just for GDP. What about the last one? Because that's the imported good, right? Imported good will not count as GDP. But for consumers, I don't care where does that product come from. So, okay, so dollar figures from different times. We can see from this figure, that's the median household income in the United States from 1984 to 2019. You can see the income from around 22 to 68, around 3 times, just if we measure as dollars, right? But if we use this amount of dollars buy the product in 2019 and use this amount of dollars by the same product in 1984? Will the product or services, good or services, 3 times higher than that one? Usually not, because of inflation, right? So how do we consider or how do we compare, if the income in this year is much better than that year, which means the purchasing power in 2019, if the purchasing power in 2019 is higher than that year, that's what we need to compare. And in that way, we need to eliminate the effect of CPI. So how to do that? We use this formula. Comparing dollars figures from different times, so inflation makes it harder to compare. We need to eliminate the effect of CPI. So the formula is the last one usually. The amount, if you want to calculate the amount in today's dollars, you should use the amount in the year T dollars times the CPI today divided by CPI in year T. So remember this equation. Let's do this one. Tell me how much grandpa's earning in current dollars. That's easy. Use the amount of dollars in that year divided by the CPI in that year. That will give you the whatever amount per that year, right? And times the CPI today, that will give you the amount of dollars today. And again, for your test, it's open book, so go back. Question. The same, kind of the same calculation. So how to calculate the today's money, today's amount of dollars with 1990s dollar. Use that amount of dollar divided by CPI of that year and times the CPI of this number. That's the result. And to calculate the percentage change, new amount minus the previous amount and divided by the previous amount. That's the result. And the same calculation for the public full year in 2018 and the public 2 year in 2018. So you can figure out find that for the public full year, that increased the most. Indexation. A dollar amount is indexed for inflation if it's automatically corrected for inflation by law or in a contract. So if some dollar, some money, your salary or the money price is corrected for inflation by law or contract, that's the definition of indexation. The increase in CPI automatically determines the cost of living adjustment COLA in many multiple years labor contract. So that's by law. Usually in the United States, your salary will increase year by year according to the indexation which published by the government or by law, by contract or something. Adjustment in social security payments and the federal income tax brackets will also automatically determined by that. So social security and the supplemental security income benefit for approximately 70 million Americans will increase 1.3% in 2021. So for this year, it's just 1.3. That's corrected for inflation by law or contract. This the last part I want to mention in this chapter is the nominal versus real interest rate. So the nominal interest rate is again, for nominal is not corrected for inflation. The rate of growth in the dollar value. So what current price is, that's nominal price, is not corrected for inflation. But when we talk about the real, no matter GDP, CPI, or inflation, or interest rate, that's corrected for inflation. So in that case, that's the rate of growth in the purchasing power of deposit of that debt. Right, so when we corrected for inflation, all we care about is the quantity, it's not the price. If the price change, increase or decrease, that doesn't matter. What we care about is just the quantity. That's the real. That's corrected for inflation. So that's also the real interest rate. The real interest rate equals to nominal interest rate minus inflation rate. If you want to calculate the inflation rate, it's also equals to the nominal interest rate minus the real interest rate. So if you remember these two equations, that's the easy example of this one. Calculate the real interest rate. Use this formula to get the real interest rate. That's easy, just basic calculation. And this question gives you that the nominal is 9%, the inflation is 3.5. All you need to do is just use these two numbers matter to each other, and the result is 5.5. That's the real interest rate. That's the purchasing power increases. So from this picture, we can see that the difference between the real interest rate and the nominal interest rate. The difference, the vertical difference between these two lines are the inflation. So in 2008, that's the recession. The inflation was not huge, but the recession in 1980s, the inflation was huge. So what happened during that time? Usually oil crisis and the government overspending. So you can imagine, I don't know, but we can see like this year, the government operates lots of money and also some infrastructures building. So we will see what will happen. We will see what the inflation will be. For chapter 10, that's the GDP. That's the income for a nation. And for chapter 11, that's the cost of consumers. So that's the cost. So that's different measures, income and cost. So up until now, we have finished Unit 1, out introduction for macroeconomics.